Okay, so this is a trombone tech video for week 4. This is going to include all of the content that we need to know for this week. We're going to start with just the scale that we need to know for this week. So get some kind of a bass clef on here. So we're doing the E flat major scale this week. And so most of these notes we already know. E flat, third position. F is in first. G, we started covering last week a bit, is in fourth position. And then we continue going higher. So we've got the next note, A flat, will be in third position. And B flat will be in the same first position as it was in the other octave, the lower octave. And this B flat is the note that band students will tune to, that B flat right there. The next note is C. If you remember, the C down here is in sixth position, but this one, an octave higher, is you could play it in sixth, but much easier and more practical to play it in third position. And D is the next one. That should be on top of the line there. If you remember, the D down here was in fourth position. This one's actually going to be in first position. Makes it a bit easier. And finally, a higher E flat here, which will be in third position. Now, in the book, and essential elements in the scale study that we'll be looking at the back of the book, it actually, I believe it has you go up to the C here and then drop down for the D down here. So you'll drop down and play the notes we already know. They do that just for range issues, as we'll talk about in a second. This kind of gets high up here for beginner trombones. This would be getting into more of an intermediate range for most trombone players, and we'll talk about that in a bit. We have the option to go down the octave to do the D in 4, and then the E flat here is still in third. Obviously, we could, if we still had a student that was having range issues, we could even have them drop down here and do the C in 6. But still, I think we want to try and get them extending their range higher once we're doing this E flat scale. Probably an intermediate scale, but since there are songs in this book that are in E flat major, using mostly these first 5 notes, it doesn't hurt to at least go over these notes and then see if we can extend the range higher once they get these 5 notes kind of settled. So that's the E flat major scale. Now, for beginning students, let's look at some books that we might use for some beginning trombone students. Obviously, we have the Standard of Excellence, which is the book we're using. The book I used in my school district teaching was this Essential Elements 2000 book. Also comes with CDs and DVDs, which tend to help the students if they look at them. And then I gave a few other examples. One other I'd like to really point out is this student instrumental course, the trombone student. They have one of these books for all the different instruments, at least the basic types anyway, maybe even more, but I know they have them for clarinet, trumpet, saxophone. And this instrumental course is more of a accelerated pace, so if you have an advanced beginner, you might start going into this, and it accelerates more quickly than some of these other beginning band method books. And there's also, as we'll see, in other levels to some of these books as well. Sound Innovations is another one I've seen. I've never used it, but it seems like it might be a good option. Best in Class is a old standard. I don't see it used all that much anymore, but your school may already have these copies or something like that in which case you might use them. Accent on Achievement is another standard old one. The Rubank method is a method that I also used as well as the Standard of Excellence when I was learning. And there's, again, multiple levels. There's an intermediate method, as we'll see with this. So just wanted to give you kind of an overview, and there's many, many more possibilities, but these are some of the ones that I've liked, mainly Standard of Excellence, Trombone Student, and the Essential Elements. But this gives you kind of an idea of things to look for. Now, for the beginning student, for a range, so this is for beginner student. Their range is going to be pretty limited at first. So, like we've been saying, you'll probably start with those first 5 notes. B flat, C, D, E flat, F. And that'll be their range for a while, and then it's probably easier to extend lower, so then you'll start adding A natural and A flat and G and the G up an octave, maybe once they're getting more comfortable. And then maybe the A up there, and then probably the B flat. The tuning B flat is probably going to be where a beginner maxes out. So that probably 1 octave of range plus a little bit down here. They'll probably be able to play all the way down to a F or an E, but they're not going to encounter that in much music. So, but probably that 1 octave B flat scale is about the range. So probably B flat to B flat will be their beginning range. Now for intermediate students, here are some books. Again, we have another level of trombone student, a different color. So again, and with this trombone student book, there's actually several different variations. There's duet books for each instrument. There's like a melodious etude book, and so there's a lot of different things within this student instrumental series that is beneficial for the student. Here we have the Rubank intermediate method. I also used this in middle school. So intermediate students, we're tending to talk about 6th, 7th, 8th grade students, middle school students who started in 4th and 5th grade. Obviously in middle school you'll have students that are just starting. Even in high school, you may have students that are just starting and beginners. Um, and so you have these second level of these books. So this is book 2 of the Standard of Excellence, Essential Elements. Selected duets are more intermediate level, I think. And speaking about late beginners, I like these books here that we saw before in the beginner method, the student instrumental course, the trombone student, because it's accelerated. So if you have like a late starter, like a middle school student who's starting, this might be a good option for you to do because it is more accelerated. Maybe less little kid kind of songs, and you than in some of these other books, and also there's some more interesting things like duets and different more challenging repertoire comes up a bit faster. So for late starters, I might start with something like this, and I'm sure there are many other books that you can start with, but that's one that I found that I liked. Now, for intermediate students, the books that I think you really should get them into as soon as possible is this Remington Warm-Up Studies book, which we do a lot of exercises out of in class. This has the long tones exercise and some basic lip slurs and scale studies, basic scales, and it talks about playing in a relaxed way. So this warm-up studies is something that students should be doing every day. Also, the Arbin book here. This is the most recent version of the Arbin Complete Method for Trombone Euphonium, and it's edited by Joseph Alessi and Dr. Brian Bauman. Joseph Alessi is the principal tromboner of the New York Philharmonic and arguably one of the greatest trombone players, classical trombone players that's ever lived. And Dr. Bauman is a euphonium player. So in this version of the book in particular, there's lots of trombone-specific comments from Mr. Alessi, and it's for a trombone student, this book is better than the old version, which is over here. This is the book that I had originally started with, and is still good. It still has all the same exercises and everything, but this newer book has a lot of additional comments, information that is good for both the teacher and the student to read, and it really gives a solid foundation of what trombone technique should be. It talks about slide technique and goals and goal tempos and things that might be ignored, exercises that might not be as important for the trombonist as they are for the euphonium player. And so basically the Arbin's book is the Bible of trombone technique. This book will stay with the student for forever. College students work out of this. Students at Juilliard work out of this. So it's a very, very important book. It has pretty much everything as far as technique that you'll need. Scales studies, different rhythmic studies, dotted 8th, 16th rhythms and syncopated rhythms. And it has multiple tonguing. It has chord studies, interval studies, some lip slurs, some flexibility studies, some long tone kind of studies. So this pretty much has everything as far as technique that the student will need. It also has a few duets and a few musical excerpts at the back of the book. The Melodious Etudes book, edited by Rochu, compiled by Rochu, but the etudes are by Marco Bordoni, and they're originally vocal pieces, vocalises for singers. and they've been kind of adapted and edited for the trombone into these books, and this is standard. And there's several levels of books. This, I believe, is the first book here, and there's different looks. There's newer editions than this one you see here, but so definitely an advanced intermediate student in late middle school or as they get into high school, this will be an important book. There are a lot of high notes in here, so it may not be practical for a standard 6th or 7th grader. It does get up to into the high range, but if they're having a particular advanced student, this could be good. The Arbin could start to be used by any intermediate student. The range is usually accessible, and it also extends up into the high register and low register. So, but there's definitely things that a 6th grader, 7th grader could do out of here. Probably not the whole book, but there are definitely some useful things, and they will work on it. Remington is definitely essential. So these 3 books, I think, these 3 books right here, the Remington, what? Sorry about that. The Remington, the Bordoni, and the Arbin are the 3 essential books that you can start with an intermediate student, and then and those 3 books will be with them for as long as they play the trombone. So these are all, that's a collection of intermediate books. Now, as far as range, an intermediate student, and this is just kind of my classification system. I mean, this is not, anything set in stone at all. But in general, I would expect an intermediate student who's in middle school aged, and they started in 4th grade, they could probably play from a low E natural in 7th position, maybe all the way up to a F up here, F natural in 1st position, right here. The Rochu book, the Bordoni vocaliste book, will go actually much higher than this. Well, not much, but it would go about maybe a 5th or so higher than this, even in the first exercises of the book. So maybe once the student has this range and they're ready to extend it, maybe start looking at the Bordoni vocaliste etudes. But like I said, you can use Arbin's and the Remington warm-up book for students within this range as well. So that's for an intermediate student. Okay, now moving on to advanced. Obviously, there are multiple levels of these kinds of books. This is again the Rubank, and they have an advanced method. There's also multiple levels of the standard of excellence and essential elements, but probably by high school, if they're a really advanced student, I mean, maybe if you have an elementary school student that's just going through those books like crazy, maybe you keep them through those series of books, or maybe even in middle school, you keep them in those series of books book 2 and book 3 of these, or Essential Elements or Standard of Excellence. But I think for the typical high school student, you're going to stick with the Melodious Etudes. This is a newer edition of that book, one that you might see more frequently. The Bordoni Melodious Etudes, the Remington, the Arbin. So these three are the essential ones to use in high school. But also I would start using maybe these Brad Edwards lip slurs in high school. You could probably start using these in middle school as well, but they do get kind of advanced pretty quickly. Also, an advanced student, and I'm thinking, somebody who's really advanced, somebody who could maybe I'd think about auditioning for college. These are the books that you would want them to be looking at, or even if they're not and they just happen to be particularly advanced. This is a selection of books that you could give them, and it will give them plenty to work on for a long time. 40 Progressive Studies by Tyrell. This just a bunch of etudes, and they start off fairly simple and get more complex. This Blazevich book, this is, I believe, the newer edition of this book. And this is a clef studies book because trombones are expected to read in bass clef, tenor clef, and alto clef. So this starts off pretty simple and progresses and gets more difficult. So this will introduce them to the clefs, different clefs, and get them on their way to being able to read and play in those different clefs. Another good etude book is the 60 Selected Studies for Trombone by Koprosh, and this is a standard one that students in college will be looking at. A lot of very technical etudes, 16th note runs, and things like that. So good technical work to start off practicing slowly and then gradually build. And then this Bloom book, 36 Studies, also comes in a variety of editions, so it may not look exactly like this. It's a good one for an advanced high school student. And I happened to come across these Bloom duets, which I've never actually played or seen. I imagine they would work for an advanced high school student in much the same way that these 36 studies might. But I put this here mostly to show that there may be several duet books that might be interesting to high school level students, and there's lots of like pop duets and jazz duets, and jazz is typically interesting to high school students. So some jazz books might be interesting for you to look for and find. For an advanced student, for the range in general, let's see, we'll talk about, I would say, for an advanced high school student, the range of their playing is probably the pedal B flat in first position, all the way up through, let's see if I can get the right amount of ledger lines here. I would say at least up to the high B flat here, again in first position. But if the student is going to be going into college or auditioning for college, the higher the range, the better. So if we can get up to the C. It's a high C. And a high D, or D flat maybe. This high C is also going to be in first position, and D natural would be in first position. D flat would be in second position. But this D flat is needed if they're going to play the Bolero solo, from the first trombone solo from the piece Bolero by Ravel. So if you can get up there, that would be great. But there's still early college students who are struggling with some of these notes. So in general, I would say the pedal B flat up to the high B flat. And that doesn't necessarily mean all these low notes in between, but they should be able to at least play a pedal B flat, and then maybe up to the F, and then go from there, depending on if they have a F attachment, which we'll talk about at another time. So that's the idea for an advanced high school student. Now, just want to go over a couple of my own thoughts about teaching trombone students in general, or just teaching in general. So it's a bit about some pedagogy. So in general, actually, before I do that, let's go back here, and I wanted to mention that if you had a student who is auditioning for college, and I put this in your notes, and they, for whatever reason, they don't have a private teacher, and you're kind of stuck, maybe they can't afford lessons, and you're kind of stuck having to teach them, you can obviously look on music department websites for what is needed for auditions, things like that. But in general, I would suggest there are some solos I would suggest, and I put these in your notes. And I won't write them all down for the sake of time, but in the notes, the Cavatine by Saint-Saëns, Morceau Symphonique by Guillemot, and there's two Andante et Allegro pieces. There's one by Barat, one by Roparts. There's some pieces by Marcello, some early music stuff that might be good, and there's others out there as well. But in the notes, you'll those are my suggestions. If you have to tell a student who's not taking lessons, but they happen to be advanced enough to go into college, those are some of the standard solos that they would have to play. As far as orchestral excerpts, usually the ones that for an undergrad audition will be the Tuba Mirum, from the Mozart Requiem. It's the second trombone solo. Bolero, the first trombone solo from Ravel's Bolero, uses the high D flat. So if you don't have a student who can hit those high notes, you might go for something else. The B major section of Ride of the Valkyries, also the Overture to La Gazaladra might be a possibility. Berlioz Hungarian March might be a possibility as well. And what I would suggest, if you're in a situation where you need to coach a student and get them into college, is there's a fantastic website called tromboneexcerpts.org, and it has recordings, multiple recordings of each excerpt. It doesn't have all of the orchestral excerpts that trombonists will have to play, but it has plenty for somebody to get into an undergraduate program. And it will have the notated music on the screen, and underneath it will have the multiple different recordings of different orchestras playing. So tromboneexcerpts.org would be something to check out. Actually, I could see if I can pull it up real quick. See my search for etude book pictures. Yeah. tromboneexcerpts.org. This is it. I don't know how much of this you can actually see, but you should be able to see it now. So it has all of these different excerpts on the side. Let's take Ravel's Bolero, for example. It has the notated solo here, so if you don't happen to know where the solo is or what the solo is, it gives you the excerpt there, and it has all these different recordings you can click on and listen to. So there's the Mozart Requiem there, and Wagner Ride of the Valkyries. So this is a great resource that you could use if you were in that situation. Okay, now to finish up, just a few teaching ideas. I wanted to stress that when you're teaching a student, in my opinion, do not play with the student, if at all possible. Now, as in our class, and typically what I'll do is I will play with the student in the beginning stages to build comfort, to build a sense of enjoyment, to build confidence. So that is the one reason when you might want to play at the same time as a student, to build confidence and comfort. But after you get past those early stages, it's important, as once the student is really interested in the trombone and they are interested in getting better, you're going to do them the best service possible is to not play with the student. And I would recommend kind of using this basic procedure. Number one, maybe let's say number one is listen to their playing, and listen and observe whatever they have prepared for you to play. And then you need to ask yourself, what are I won't write all that out, but what are the biggest things that can help that person get better? So, big concept. So you have to find the big concept that is going to help them get better, whether it's the air or the embouchure, hearing the pitch in their head, or the rhythm, whatever it is. You've got to find that big concept. Okay, so you've got to find that. Now, after you've found that, the procedure might go as follows. Oops. Just trying to put a line there to define. Anyway, let me get a different color here. So beyond that, once you've kind of got the big concept, you want to model. You want to model that concept in your own playing. And then 2, your job is to observe. You observe them trying to imitate you. So you model, you observe them trying to imitate what you're showing them, and then offer them feedback on their success. So, and feedback is usually best in quick, short comments, I've found. And what we want to do, the goal here, is to really shorten the feedback loop. So if you think of a feedback loop, shortest way we can do that is if we observe, give quick feedback, and then observe again. So going back and forth between steps 2 and 3 over and over again. Now, if that's not entirely successful, it may be necessary to go back to step 1, model, and then observe, and then feedback. So, but if we can get into a kind of a rhythm, observing feedback, or even sometimes maybe giving feedback at the same time to remind them of what you're asking, and then going back and modeling, and so this is the kind of feedback loop that will create success for a student, in my opinion. And so that's kind of my model for teaching this all together. And it's so important that you don't play with the student unless you're just building confidence, comfort, or something like playing duets, or in which you're building ensemble skills. But if you play with the student, they're really depending on you for their sound. It gives them a false sense of security that their sound, because they're listening to you, your sound is hopefully bigger and better than theirs, so your sound kind of takes over, and they associate that your sound is their sound, and so they get a better sense of security than there actually might be there. Also, if you're playing with a student at the same time, you aren't as conscious about what they're doing. You're conscious about what you're doing, what you're trying to do. You're hearing a little bit, but there's a huge difference between when you're playing with a student as opposed to when you're observing. And it's much more helpful to the student when you're observing, and 100% of your attention is observing what they're doing, looking for problems, looking for visual indications with embouchure and posture and things that you can point out to them that you wouldn't necessarily get if you're playing with them at the same time. Also, as far as musician skills, if you're playing with a student, you're not forcing them to internalize things like pulse and rhythm. They might not even be understanding what the rhythm is. And in many cases they will just imitate what you're doing as quickly as they can to get through, to make it sound correct. Um, but if you ask them then to play it on their own, they might have issues with the rhythm and pulse. So you're kind of doing all the work for them, and they're just kind of tagging along for the ride. Whereas if you really work to build their independence through this kind of procedure, I think it's going to be much more successful for students.